I have an idea. Let's speed paint some Kruleboyz. Oh yes, back again my friends, and thank you for tuning in today. I thought I would take this chance to create a recipe for speed painting some Kruleboyz from the Dominion box set. Recently I've acquired this box, thanks GW, and I've been working my way through its contents. So, without any further ado, let me lay out this speed painting recipe for you. The first step involves the airbrush. I prepped up some olive brown from Vallejo and laid a nice healthy coat over a black base coat. This didn't take long and it didn't need to be pretty, so just liberally douse the model in all of that olive brown. Following that, I mixed up some pale brown and spraying downward in the zenithal style, kind of spraying a halo of light over the model. I was able to take advantage of some of the 3D aspects of the figurine, starting to, shade some of those volumes as the olive brown was left in the shadows and the pale brown created a bit of a highlight. And then just stepping along the stones and adding to that, I mixed up some channel favorite, Buff. Oh yes, Buff is the stuff. And concentrating this in a tighter ring around the model, more just a kind of a straight down blast, but I also wanted to hit some of the areas that were sticking out a little bit, like the back of the model's loincloth, kind of where its butt is, basically, the tops of the shields, just a few kind of more specific spots, but again, mainly just getting that top-down light source established. Now with this gradient of glorious browns and buff applied to the model, it was time to add some texture to those mottled rags. I got some deck tan out from Vallejo. It's kind of a warm, neutral gray tone. I took my brush and kind of forking it off on the paper towel, making the bristles split a little bit. So when I laid the brush down, I would get a textured result. Kind of like dry brushing, but not taking so much paint off of the brush. You can see just sort of shaping the tool into, kind of a spread out forking pattern and laying that down on some of the raised areas created this leather texture. With that out of the way, the skin received a coat of pale sand. It's just kind of moving up in the steps of ivories. I know on the footage these colors may look pretty similar, a light gray, a light pale sand color, but they are different, trust me. And just picking out the upward facing angles of a lot of the muscles, the tendons on the hands, the veins, adding a lot of detail to the face, and pretty much ignoring the feet. This is speed painting, so we're going to be pulling some punches here and there. Now, finally, some actual color could be added to the model. Also, I used my sticky tack, some poster putty, to block off parts of the figure so I could just hit the shield with a couple dots of Khador red out of the airbrush. And you can see the results here, just concentrating this dot to the upward portion of the shield. It's already been kind of rendered in this tan gradient, so just very transparent coat of red. Don't apply too much or it'll flow into the crevices, but also don't worry if it flows into the crevices because I'll be laying a coat of contrast paint over the shield. So try your best, but don't worry because we've got training wheels. And again, moving along in the glorious tones of full color, away from all these desaturated tones that I seem to prefer, I got some Plaguebearer flesh from the contrast paint range and covered the skin. The nice brown base coat showing through this kind of pale, disgusting, sickly green tone gave me that perfect Kruleboyz skin tone with not a lot of time invested. Speaking of not investing a lot of time, let's get out some dark tone from Army Painter. It's just their black wash that they carry. And all of the rags that were base coated with these brown tones received a very thick wash of dark tone. I wanted the rags to come out looking like a weathered black, so black in the shadows kind of giving way to the tans and the browns and the neutral gray in the upper area. But again, I don't care how this comes out. I have a recipe in my head, and whatever result I get, that's the result that I'm after. I think that these rags look just fine. Then it was down to picking out the armor, the shoulder pads, the knee pads, the belt, the the spear tip, all of that gets a coat of Gunmetal Gray from Vallejo. It's a nice deep silver tone. And all of these areas, once they were dry, we're going to receive a heavy coat of dark tone from Army Painter as well. Then, from the contrast range, now that the shields were dry, this is how I'm going about this. I'm touching one area while that dries, I'm base coating another area, just trying to be as efficient as I can. But laying down a coat of Wyldwood over the shields, over the bindings. They have some wrappings around their shins, around their wrists. Some of them have necklaces, the bit of binding holding their shield on. One of them has an eye patch. Cool. But all these areas will receive a wash of Wyldwood from the contrast range. Then it was on to that beautiful base. I wanted to create a swampy, murky atmosphere characteristic of the Kruleboyz. So it was down to the wet blend. I took some olive brown, some black, and some green brown, and just made a mess. There are some areas of these bases that I left unbased, just left the factory texture showing through, because I do want to add some layers of Mod Podge in the future, a little bit of swampy, murky water. So when you're basing these models and prepping them up in the beginning, leave some flat spaces. While the heavy coat of wet blending was drying, it usually takes a little bit longer when you slop down such thick amounts of paint. I pulled out the dark earth from the Secret Weapons weathering powder range, and adding some water to that, kind of creating a wash that's just water and weathering powder. I applied that to all the silver areas, all the shoulder pads, the belts, the spear tips, kind of keeping this is my rusty tone, keeping the rust, located at the base of the spears. It's stabbing into things, it gets polished, but it doesn't go to the hilt every time, and that's the area that gets rusted out. That's how I see it. Switching back in order, now that the base was dry, I hit it with just the slightest dry brush of pale sand, picking out some raised areas, not being too specific or meticulous about this, just a very slight dry brushing just to add some tonal confusion to the whole situation. It's a boggy base. It doesn't need to be perfect, and anyone who's ever taken a walk in the swamp knows that things are very chaotic in the swamp. Speaking of chaos in the swamp, it's time to bust out some of that Mod Podge dimensional magic. Mix that up with some green brown and a slight touch of olive brown. Lay that over the flat areas. You may want to apply this in more than one coat. Let the first one dry, lay the second one, kind of layer things up. Lay it down in multiple thin coats instead of one thick, heavy coat so it doesn't dry. It's a gel medium, so it can get kind of blobby if you lay it on too heavily. So I think playing it on the safer side and just laying down 2 thin coats versus 1 thick, you get a much better kind of even sitting surface of the swamp look. And then, not pictured, take some olive brown, mix it with black, paint up the rim of that base. 360! Special shout out goes to the guy with his ankles cut off, so it looks like he's wading through the swamp. And a special shout out to all the Kruleboyz. You can see they are not pretty, they're not perfect, but they are complete. And that's just what Dr. Tones ordered. I hope that this video inspired you to create your own recipes. Take mine, modify it, make it your own, add or remove some steps, change the colors. Do as thou wilt, Chromatic Warrior. And until next week, when you walk out that door and you see the swampy tones and the bog mist creeping in as the Kruleboyz advance to take your town, remember, you can always paint your skin green and just join the orcs. I'll see you next time.